November 10, 1955. The merchant ship Tuvalu spotted something drifting 600 miles off course in the South Pacific. It was the MV Hoi Tar, listing badly to port, half submerged, her superstructure barely above the waterline. The crew boarded her. 25 people had been on that ship when she left port 5 weeks earlier. Now the galley stove was still warm, the clocks had stopped, and every single person was gone. You're listening to The Unlit Room. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Today, 25 people abandoned a ship that couldn't sink and disappeared into the Pacific. October 3, 1955. The MV Hoi Tar sat at dock in RPR Harbor, Western Samoa. She was a 70-foot merchant vessel with a cork-lined hull, designed to stay afloat even if flooded. Her captain was Thomas Miller, a British expatriate who'd been sailing the Pacific for years. He called the ship Unsinkable. He wasn't wrong. That morning, Miller loaded cargo, medical supplies, timber, empty oil drums, and $1,000 in cash. 25 people climbed aboard, crew and passengers, including Dr. A.D. Parsons, a government medical officer traveling to the TOHK Low Islands. The Hoi Tar was supposed to arrive in 2 days. She never did. October 5th. The TOHK Low Islands. The Hoi Tar didn't arrive on schedule. By the 6th, search aircraft were scanning the route. They found nothing. No debris, no distress signals, no wreckage. A ship carrying 25 people had simply disappeared somewhere in the South Pacific. The search continued for a week, then 2 weeks, then 3. The New Zealand Air Force declared the search suspended. The Hoi Tar was presumed lost at sea. The Pacific is the largest ocean on Earth. Ships go down, storms come up fast. In 1955, if you didn't have a working radio and didn't make it to a life raft, the ocean swallowed you whole. That's how these stories were supposed to end. November 10th, 5 weeks after the Hoi Tar left port. A merchant ship called the Tuvalu spotted something drifting near Fiji, 600 miles west of the planned route. It was the Hoi Tar, still afloat, still intact, listing heavily to port, her deck half underwater but very much not sunk. The crew boarded her. The engine room was flooded, the starboard engine clutch had corroded through. But the cork lining in the hull was doing exactly what it was designed to do, keeping the ship above water. The superstructure was dry. The galley stove was cold but recently used. A canvas awning had been stretched across part of the deckhouse as if someone had tried to create shade. And the ship was completely empty. 25 people, gone. No bodies, no signs of struggle. The life rafts were missing, which meant they'd left deliberately. But why? The cargo hold had been partially looted. Medical supplies were gone. So was most of the food. The timber and oil drums were still there. The $1,000 in cash, untouched, still locked in the captain's cabin. On the main deck, investigators found Dr. Parsons' medical bag. It was open. Inside, a scalpel, surgical clamps, and a bundle of bandages, soaked in dried blood. Blood on a ship doesn't always mean violence. Accidents happen at sea, a fall, a broken bone, a deep cut from a cargo hook. But the amount of blood, and the fact that someone had performed what looked like emergency surgery on deck, suggested something worse. The radio was still on. It was tuned to 2182 kHz, the international distress frequency. Whoever had been on that ship had tried to call for help, but the wiring had been damaged. The antenna cable was corroded. Instead of broadcasting across 100 miles, the radio's range had been cut to just 2. If the Hoi Tar had sent a distress call, no one would have heard it unless they were practically alongside. The New Zealand Commission of Inquiry spent months trying to piece together what happened. They interviewed the ship's owners, they examined the wreckage, they tested the cork lining and confirmed that Captain Miller had been right. The Hoi Tar couldn't sink. Even fully flooded, she'd stay afloat, which meant that 25 people, including the captain who knew his ship was unsinkable, chose to leave her. They climbed into life rafts and pushed off into the open Pacific. And whatever made them do that was worse than taking their chances in a small boat, 600 miles from the nearest land, with limited supplies and no rescue in sight. The inquiry couldn't determine what happened. There are 3 theories, none of them provable. The first, flooding caused panic. Passengers who didn't know the ship was unsinkable saw water pouring into the engine room and assumed they had minutes before she went down. They abandoned ship in haste, and Captain Miller, unable to stop them, went with them to try to keep them alive. The second, piracy. Japanese fishing vessels were operating in the area. Cargo was missing. The broken window on the flying bridge could have been forced entry. But there was no evidence of violence, and why would pirates take the medical supplies but leave the cash? The third, something happened aboard that made staying more dangerous than leaving. An injury that turned into an infection, a fire that threatened to spread, a structural failure that made the crew believe the ship was about to break apart. All 3 theories account for some of the evidence, none of them account for all of it. The Hoi Itar was towed to port and eventually salvaged. She's still around, restored and on display. You can see the cork lining, you can see the engine room, you can stand on the deck where someone opened a doctor's bag and tried to save a life. What you can't see is what happened to the 25 people who left her. Not one body was ever recovered, not one life raft ever found. The Pacific doesn't explain itself, it just keeps what it takes. If this one kept you up tonight, good. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. Follow the Unlit Room wherever you listen. Tell a friend who can't sleep. Full story on the main channel. Follow if you're wide awake. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.